This is going to be impossible because I am writing a 90,000-word book that's coming out next spring, and they want me to tell you about it in about 12 minutes. The book is a quest for proper innovation inside companies, and I'll share with you a few of the things I'm learning on my travels. I'm moving to lots of places from Finland to Australia to see organizations that are transforming. So I started the UK edition of Wired and spent 8 years kind of going out there seeing why every big established organization needed to transform quickly. Because it's not just the big well-funded companies that are building the future. We've all seen all these crazy innovations at the Consumer Electronics Show. There was nothing that exciting at the Consumer Electronics Show, but it's the distribution of ideas. The Boston Dynamics robot, we've seen some of those already on screen. Very, very well-funded company, bought by Google, then sold to SoftBank. Tens of millions of dollars to make one of these robots. But then I went to the technical school in Zurich, ETH University, and I saw this low-cost alternative made by a bunch of students, a bunch of graduate students in their 20s. It's called the AnyBot, and they made it for thousands of dollars. It has thermal imaging cameras. It goes in and does search and rescue. So it made me think, you don't need to be the big, well-funded kid on the block. And of course, the fact that everybody has access to the cloud, everybody has access to crowdfunding, creates shorter and shorter cycles of innovation. And if you're an incumbent, suddenly there's new realities. We had invisibility of data, and suddenly there's a bunch of companies putting nanosats in the air, getting live imagery. This one is called Planet. You know, you could see the Apple HQ in Cupertino being built in real time through their satellites. Suddenly, there's layers of data. Suddenly, drones are evolving. We thought we knew what drones were. Then I see this drone, ProDrone, which claims to be the first drone with robot arms. And I'm thinking, maybe this is the new way we should be taking our children to school. Maybe this is a new way to abduct children from school. We talk about autonomous cars, but we don't yet know what this is going to mean for secondary innovation like retail. There's already a startup in Shanghai that's got the grocery store that comes to you. It's called Wheelies. You get hungry in the middle of the night, you switch on the app. The idea is it will bring your beer, your cookies. We still have human biases, of course. We deny that we're going to be transformed by these new technologies. Think about autonomous driving. The first time you're in that car, it's going to be weird. We don't have audio. Do we have audio back there? This is a guy called Bill Rimmer who took his mum in his Tesla. But you know, the next time, it's just going to be another way to get to the shops. So we have to kind of confront our biases. So why am I telling you this? Because every company is facing the same pressure in every sector. This is the homepage of a bank, HSBC, that's been annotated by CB Insights to show for every link startups that are taking some of the value. And this is a bank. I can show you the same for retail, for food, for delivery. And behavior is changing so fast. Mary Meeker at Kleiner Perkins last week gave out her annual Internet Trends Report. This is one slide that jumped out. The number of hours Americans spend on their digital screen every day. From 2008, 2.7 hours a day. Now it's 6 hours a day. This is time you're not spending talking to your colleagues or your children or your friends. And there is one of these exponential curves hitting all sorts of industries, not just IT, where something that was expensive becomes free, but also things like genomics. The cost of sequencing human DNA on a logarithmic scale has gone from $100 million to a couple of $100 in the last 17 years. The green curve is falling more steeply than Moore's law. So what does this mean if you are running a successful company? Most of the time, you are in denial. Most of the time, you just carry on running as usual because you're making money every quarter. And only then do you look down and realize, well, actually the business model is no longer relevant. So I see a lot of companies talk about, well, we have an innovation strategy. We have a head of innovation in another building. We have a corporate accelerator where we have a couple of startups. And this is mostly just theatre, ticking a box, not delivering much value. So I am traveling looking for the rare cases of organizations that have found strategies to innovate. And I'm going to share very briefly now with you a few of these examples. This is Kathy Hannon, who worked as a junior marketing executive at Google's R&D lab, Google X. And Google X has done some amazing things. It created Waymo, way ahead on autonomous cars. It's doing balloons that deliver internet access to the 4 billion people who can't currently get online. It's been working with wind energy, using these kites that float offshore. It's doing all these things. And I was obsessed with how they can create the psychology to get people taking really big risks on what they call moonshots. And Kathy had an obsession with renewable energy. And she went to a dinner at the boss's house where somebody mentioned a research paper that somebody at Xerox PARC had come up with, which suggested it could be possible to turn seawater into fuel, renewable, zero-carbon fuel. And so she kind of raised her hand and said, I'd like to lead that project. And at Google X, at the beginning of every project, they resource it a very little at the beginning, but you must come up with kill criteria, metrics that say, okay, we haven't reached these targets, we're going to kill the project. And Kathy Hannon started to prove that the science was working. They had one criterion at the beginning: we have to be able to produce energy no more expensively than gas at the petrol pump. And over 3 years, they took the price down from $1,000 a gallon to $30 a gallon to $12 a gallon. Then January 2016, she went to the boss and said, I'm going to kill the project. And they all got bonuses for killing the project. Because in the meantime, the price of oil, when they started, had been $100 a barrel, fell to $30 a barrel. It was still a cost challenge, even though the science worked. And so it's about creating psychological safety for people to take big risks and fail. This is the boss of her team. His name is Astro Teller. He does wear those rollerblades in the office. And he's obsessed with how we can optimize the resources, both cash and talent, and get people to think big, get people to reinvent what the business is. And sometimes they fail publicly, but just think of the value they've created with maybe $100 billion worth of autonomous car. So it's always interesting to see how the bosses can empower the junior people in an organization. In Helsinki, I was talking to the team that runs Supercell, that makes Clash of Clans. This is Ilkka Pananen, who wants to be the world's least powerful CEO, he says, because he wants the small teams, the cells of 15, 20 people, to come up with their own ideas the whole time. Better characters, better gameplay, better narrative. And they have all-hands meetings on Friday where they get together and they toast with champagne the ideas that people spent time on that weren't good enough to release. And they have a wine bottle label that they write on with the lessons that they learned. So another approach I'm seeing is a company that thought it was one kind of business which isn't going anywhere, but there's a part of that business, if you reframe it, that becomes interesting. So last week I went to see a bookshop in a very expensive street in London that's been there since the 1930s, has the Queen's coat of arms. That is not a good business to be in, selling books. And they realized this, so they decided maybe our expertise is not selling books, but it's curating collections of books. Heywood Hill Books now does subscriptions. They will hand choose books for you. They have 8 women reading 100 books a month, and they know you. They charge 400 or 500 euros a month for this. They hand wrap it, they send it to you. They have a couple of thousand customers. They do personal libraries for expensive houses. They did 3,000 books in a Swiss mountain chalet for a wealthy woman. They charged about 600,000 euros. It took me about 2 months to get an appointment to see them because they're so busy. It's reframing the value. The airline in Australia had the worst ever loss 5 years ago. Couple of $1 billion loss. But they realized maybe the value of the airline business is not so great. But we have something which we could build a really good business on, the loyalty program. Half of the population of Australia is in the Qantas loyalty program. They now have a team of 150 people prototyping new businesses to build on this loyalty program. Health insurance, life insurance, financial services, food and drink club. It's now 30% of the profits of the entire Qantas group. Or I went to see a bank in Finland that's been there for 100 years. It's called OP. They realized that a lot of the bank business is being commodified. So how can it reframe what it does? Its mission to be useful to its customers. Well, it's just built 5 private hospitals all over Finland and a health insurance business alongside it to create really efficient ways to keep people healthy. Another approach, accept that you can't innovate yourself and build an ecosystem. Work with partners. The founder of a big Chinese phone company, Showme, which is going to IPO for a reported $100 billion in the next year, they make no margin on the hardware. He's often accused of copying Apple. This is what the stores look like in Showme. I won't comment on whether these are copied from Apple's, but their business is really interesting. They've invested in about 400 hardware and accessory startups, a small amount of money, but they promote these products in their stores, and that's where they make most of the margin. The best-selling air purifier in China, the best-selling battery pack in China are Xiaomi. They don't have the risk of knowing what the customer on the street wants. They don't have to have huge staff, which becomes bureaucratic. They use the ecosystem to build their profit. We put him on the cover of Wired saying it's time to copy China. Even countries are becoming ecosystems. This is Kaspar Koljas, who's in Tallinn in Estonia. He's allowing anybody who's not physically in Estonia to build a business there, to be an e-resident. He's doing something called the Borderless Nation. Anybody here can apply online for 100 euros, can get an e-residency. You can start a business in Estonia and trade in the Eurozone without actually going there. They're even talking about doing a cryptocurrency. He calls Estonia like an app store on which he wants other governments to offer services. Another approach I'm seeing is companies taking an emerging technology and using it in fresh ways. The biggest fertilizer company in Europe is in Norway. It's called Yara. They had a problem. They had to truck 50,000 truckloads of fertilizer from the factory in northern Norway, and they couldn't get drivers, and it was expensive. So they've just spent $40 million creating an autonomous electric ship to see if that will work. This is a prototype. They announced this in September. Suddenly, all sorts of other companies in Norway are saying, hey, can we pay you to use this? And I'm thinking, this could actually be a bigger business. And finally, think of how you're using space in your organization to encourage people to come together and collaborate. Tony Hsieh built up a shoe company, Zappos, into something that Amazon paid $1 billion for. And he's obsessed with creating like the conditions for a party in their office. It's in the central downtown part of Las Vegas, which is kind of run down, and he's spending $350 million of his own money in a kind of slightly flawed experiment trying to create a cluster where startups and creatives and theatrical people will come and build a new city. He talks about the 3 C's. I want collisions, co-learning, and connectedness. And I think a lot of the startups that we're influenced by from the West Coast are in turn influenced by Burning Man, which is the city of 70,000 people in the desert, no cash economy, a gift economy, but a creative expression economy, and a let's prototype different ways to live. We wouldn't have Airbnb were it not for Burning Man, which is why startup incubators like in Paris, the biggest one in Europe, called Station F, are a way to create things we haven't yet decided we want to create. You know, there's a building in the center of London just opened called the Crick Institute that's trying to solve cancer. It's a genomic research station. And the beautiful thing is there's no walls on the inside. So the biophysicist can meet the data scientist, can meet the information graphics expert. So I'm going to leave you with why this needs happening. Because there's always going to be a new one of these coming along in whatever form, challenging today's way of making money. When the iPhone first came out, the head of a big tech company making smartphones was asked on television if he saw it as a threat. This is what he said.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? Thank you.